Well, good morning, everyone. We will get started in just about a minute or so. We'll give people a time to get logged on, and we appreciate you being with us this morning.
Looks like we already have some sort of chat.
Yeah. Well, all right, we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Fly. I'm the president of the Brooks Group. We're excited to have you with us. Today is, we're talking about ninja entrepreneurs. And really redefining what the essential priorities are for sales growth and profitability. We've all lived through some pretty interesting times over these last 150 or so days, and we're excited to be with you this morning. The panelists this morning include myself, Michelle Richardson. She's the VP of our research center here at the Brooks Group. Chad Oakley, he's the CEO of Charles Aris Executive Search. Todd Herman, he's the owner of Todd Herman and Associates, and Dennis Stearns, owner of the Stearns Financial Group. In addition to being a panelist, Dennis is also our moderator, so I'm going to introduce him and then let him kick us off. Dennis, as I mentioned, is the owner of the Stearns Financial Group. And in addition to this, which is a $1 billion plus wealth management firm, he's won many awards. Dennis has been called one of the leading scenario experts in the field of in the financial industry by the Financial Planning Association. Not surprising, knowing that Dennis is also a chess expert and was on one of the winningest Pan Am collegiate chess teams in U.S. history. Dennis is also an author, including a regular contributor to publications like TheStreet.com and the Journal of Financial Planning. And he's written several books. His latest is around ninja entrepreneurship and how guts and ingenuity will transform our world. And that will be published later this year. In addition to all that, I'm proud to call Dennis a friend. We've known each other for a decade or more, and I'm excited to be with him on this panel today. So Dennis, would love for you to share some of the insights that you've picked up as you've been putting together the Ninja Entrepreneur book.
Yeah, thank you, Gary, and hello, everyone. So it was interesting how Ninja Entrepreneur was born. To an extent, I've been preparing for this book my entire life. I've had decades working with hundreds of business owners, and even I have an undergraduate and master's degree in finance, but my real degrees, my graduate degrees, were from the hundreds of business owners I've worked with in good times and bad. And they've taught me a lot of wonderful lessons. They've learned some lessons the hard way. And so I've been preparing for the book for a long time. But then it was last fall when Gary Fly and I were out interviewing business owners for another book called Fourth Quarter Fumbles for Business Owners, because we see a lot of problems that business owners get into when they approach the fourth quarter of their life, and just a whole host of things there. And we came out of one interview that was just amazing. We had 45 minutes scheduled, and I think we barely were able to escape after 2.5 hours. I mean, it was unbelievable stuff. And we walked out of there, looked at each other and said, this is not a fourth quarter fumbles. There's another book in here. And so Ninja Entrepreneur essentially was truly birthed at that moment. And so the concept of Ninja Entrepreneur is that, again, as our audience knows, entrepreneurs really make it happen. So, as opposed to the media that seems to think that DC, Washington, DC, and the Beltline, that everything circulates around that, the reality is over decades and decades and decades, the real drivers of job growth in this country, a lot of the innovation in this country, has been the privately held businesses. And they have done a phenomenal job despite sometimes interventions or actions by the federal government. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart in terms of the ninja entrepreneur concept. And one of the things that I want to talk about, just to kind of set up the whole tone for our other panelists who are experts in their particular area, is this concept of ninja trait number 3, making their own weather pattern. So what does that exactly mean? And so next slide, please. And so Virginia Tech Research Park, let me start with that one. I was one of the founders of the Gateway University Research Park, home of the Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering. And back in the early days when we were going around the country researching, what did we want to look like when we grew up, we visited the Virginia Tech Research Park. And it was fascinating. Those of you who don't know, Blacksburg, Virginia, the person who runs that park described it as the worst place almost in the United States. I think I'd argue with that a little bit, but the worst place to start a business and run a business because it had terrible logistics. It was difficult to get people to come there. Now you did have Virginia Tech creating a lot of interesting technology transfer and other things. And so when they started that research park and they had a few small private businesses bubble up, over time, they started to work with one another. And so by the time we visited them, they had well over 70 different businesses, and they were literally creating their own weather pattern. They were working with each other, networking with each other. And again, you'll hear some of those themes as we go along here. They were sharing best practices. The head of HR from one company might have coffee with the head of HR from another, and they were truly making some amazing things happen. So I've been keeping up with what's happening there. In the Great Recession, they had, by that time, over 100 businesses, and they ended up having less pain. Now, they had pain in the Great Recession of 08, 09, but they had less pain than a lot of other places around the country. And they can attribute a lot of it to this network effect and creating their own weather pattern as a group and as individuals. Fast forward to the pandemic, they're doing exactly the same thing. So in Ninja Entrepreneur, we got an entire chapter devoted to kind of that historical case study of why those folks have been more resilient, more able to withstand some of the shocks that have come along the way. And that gets us to our next ninja, which happens to be Jeb and Will Brooks, the owners of the Brooks Group. And they are going to be in the Ninja Entrepreneur book. And so, again, fascinating background. They did a lot of things right. They did a lot of things wrong, but learned from them. They were able to pivot very well. One of the things they attribute to doing right is hiring Michelle and Gary to run areas of their business and be able to take them to an entirely new level. And so in their particular case, again, just in a few minutes, you're going to hear from Gary and Michelle some of the pretty amazing things that they've been able to do since the pandemic began. You know, this is a business that when the pandemic hit, 95% of their business was in person, getting on an airplane, going somewhere. And again, I won't steal any of their thunder, but wonderful case study just in terms of how they got data and then how they executed and made decisions around data. The next one on the list is Amir Hussain. Now that's a name you probably don't know. He's in Austin. Spark Cognition is his company. He is also going to be in Ninja Entrepreneur. Fascinating guy. But the thing that is interesting about Amir is he came to this country with virtually nothing and a whole series of trials and tribulations, thought he had educational credits at the University of Texas, Austin. Turns out that somebody had given him wrong information. I mean, he has been through so many twists and turns, it's unbelievable. He is now leading the whole effort with some of the major smokestack industries, what we would call the old industries, industrials, basic chemicals, other kinds of companies in this country. And he is helping them move into the age of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and he's tech enabling their company. And that tech enabling pattern, okay, yes, all the headlines are grabbed these days by what Google and Apple and Amazon and all the Facebook, all those companies are doing. But the real story of Ninja, I think, in the next 10 years and of closely held businesses is that ability to turbocharge and tech enable companies. And it is going to be incredible what companies are able to do. And again, Amir works with companies like Honeywell and Boeing and others, helping them figure this stuff out. And again, this will get to when Chad Oakley, our expert on talent acquisition and retention, gets on. This leads to the point of Amir surrounding himself with the right people to make this vision come true. Then the last ninja that I want to mention is another name that may not be familiar to most people, a guy named Pete Burgess. And the Tar Heel Basement you may know, because Tar Heel Basement advertises everywhere. And they have an amazing advertising campaign. But Tar Heel Basement is essentially an old school business of waterproofing basements, fixing foundations, doing that sort of thing. And Pete, in his 70s, by the way, Pete and a niche private equity company have led an effort to revolutionize that industry. They have been acquiring other basement companies around the country. They are taking technology, again, back to that tech enabling piece on marketing and internal systems, some of the stuff you're going to hear from Todd Herman, who is our systems and processes expert. They have been doing things to turbocharge what is essentially an old line business. And again, just amazing results. And again, Pete is going to be one of the chapters in Ninja Entrepreneur and making it happen in his 70s. So good for him. And so that kind of sets up what we're going to be talking about with our panel. And so now I'd like to bring in Gary and Michelle. And Gary and Michelle, again, many of you who already work with the Brooks Group know them well and know some of the things that they do. Again, I think it's brilliant. Michelle, tremendous background, setting up this research entity and getting a lot of data, getting really close to the customer. And then Gary helping put a lot of glue together around some of that. And so I will turn it over to Gary and Michelle.
Dennis, thank you for that. And thanks for the lead in. Yeah, as Dennis mentioned, the vast majority of our business pre-COVID was done in person and required travel. So on March the 13th, when we sent our team home to work from home, we were really stuck. We didn't know what this meant. We didn't know if it was a 1 week, 2 week deal. We certainly weren't thinking it was an into August deal as we've seen now or an into 2021 deal as we're starting to think it may be. So we took some pretty dramatic action initially. And one of the first things we did was we told our sales team to stand down, not to sell. Nobody was thinking about sales training at that point in time. But what we did instead was get really close to the customer. So it was our intent to understand what was going on in the marketplace and what was concerning to our customers. And that really launched this whole research initiative that Michelle's going to talk more about. But we ended up, since that time, we've ended up literally surveying thousands of sales leaders, having individual conversations with hundreds of sales leaders in weekly forum groups that we convened. And through all of this, we've heard some very consistent messaging. And really, there are 4 keys that we keep hearing about and that we're going to talk about today. The first is filling the sales pipeline. People are now realizing that the pipeline may be bare. There's some companies obviously have done well, but filling the sales pipeline is the first. The second is the new realities of price pressure. What will the market bear in today's world? Third is what are the selling skills that are required for the next normal? And fourth are quotas, compensation, and KPIs. How do I even think about setting these things? How do I compensate my sellers? And what sort of KPIs should I be measuring? So we're going to start with filling the sales pipeline, and Michelle's going to talk a little bit about what the keys there are and what we're hearing and seeing in the research. Michelle?
Thanks, Gary. And as Gary mentioned, we have done a lot of research since March in particular, putting out weekly surveys, really trying to understand what's happening in the market. And it allowed us to get ahead of many issues. The pipeline, sales pipeline, lead generation, the number one challenge that we have been hearing about. 63% of the organizations that we surveyed reported a decline in their pipeline and needing to fill that. So what are we seeing in terms of the data right now? Your top lead sources are email, phone outreach, and cold calling and referrals in that order. Print advertising, social media, those are the lowest, the least resources that folks are using. But you need to be agile. So as you are looking at these types of lead generation sources, what we also heard was that things change. So you may try something for 2 weeks and it works great, and then all of a sudden it's not as effective. And so you need to reevaluate and try something different. Deal sizes are trending smaller than they were last year. 49% of the organizations that we surveyed indicated that their deal sizes were smaller. Only 7% indicated that deal sizes were larger. So we know that the pandemic is benefiting some, but by and large, that's a smaller number. And existing accounts really are your best opportunity right now. Customers are reluctant to engage with new vendors. I read recently 47% of business-to-business firms are saying that they're not going to engage with anybody new right now, although we do expect that to get better towards the end of the year and definitely into 2021. Gary, anything you would like to add on that?
Yeah, so as Michelle mentioned, we've seen this information in our research, and we've operationalized it on our side. Our sales team does use email and referrals heavily. We've clearly seen deal size trending smaller, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about that because at the beginning of the pandemic, what we had to offer was traditional sales training and a methodology. But what the clients wanted and what the clients needed to be successful was skills training. They needed to be upskilled on how do you actually sell in a virtual world. So we actually went through some rapid product development and created products that would speak to the marketplace right now in upskilling. And we use that, quite frankly, as a way to fill the top of the funnel because it started to build trust and rapport with people with things they needed right now. Which leads us to our second, and that's the new realities of price pressure and selling value. Michelle, what do we see in the research?
Well, organizations are definitely reporting that price pressure was increasing during COVID. I mean, price is always an issue for salespeople. They always report that customers want to negotiate, but this was really exacerbated since March. We had reports of loyal customers, people that our customers could count on for that recurring business. Those folks were asking to rebid contracts. We heard budgets were freezing, particularly if you sell capital equipment or some other capital product. 74% of our survey respondents indicated moderate to significant price pressure from their clients, and 65% reported an average discount request, just right off the bat, of 5 to 15%. We also started hearing about collections concerns. So our organizations that we work with were saying that their customers that maybe typically paid net 30 were asking for extended terms. We noticed that accounting folks and financial services folks were having to get more involved in the sales conversation, and salespeople were being asked to double check creditworthiness as part of the sales process. An interesting trend, and this one I think is quite remarkable, this was kind of the biggest aha, at least for us in terms of this particular topic. CFO involvement in B2B sales increased 91% since January. And that is data from a company called Chorus.ai. They're a sales technology firm. But what they were seeing is as the time wore on and the shutdown continued, more and more CFO and financial decision makers were getting involved in the sales process. That's a very different sales conversation for your team. They are used to dealing with end users, and now all of a sudden they're having to really justify the financial benefits of a product or service. They're having to talk about ROI, risk management, total cost of ownership. So quite a shift in terms of skill set for salespeople. Gary.
And what we've seen, I want to play off of that last point that Michelle made. I can tell you that I think in the last 3 weeks, we've been asked 4 or 5 times to do ROI sorts of studies, or how do we prove this? So we've actually had to build out dashboards for clients to just, so that they can understand it. The other thing that we're seeing is that approval sizes have gone down. So not only are CFOs being involved in more of the decisions, but oftentimes the decision maker has less authority for spending, which leads us right into the next category that we're seeing, which are what are the selling skills for the next normal.
Yeah, Gary, I was just going to make a comment. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to make a comment that Chad mentioned in some of the other discussions we've had, that one of the hardest positions to fill right now is the CFO. And what you're saying is there's a different set of skills maybe even that's going to be needed. So maybe that's an interesting discussion point we can hit on later.
Sure, and it really is, because it changes the conversation for the seller, but it also puts the CFO in a different sort of seat as well, right? How do I evaluate sales training or the sorts of things that we have to offer? We approach it really from what then skills do the sales team need in this new world, and we're again finding a few interesting things. And the first, and I'll let Michelle talk about it, but bad habits. This is a time that those get highlighted, right, Michelle?
Exactly. I think the current environment has taken weaknesses in a sales team and just made them more magnified. And certainly the need for virtual selling skills has become quite evident. And many teams have found that there's efficiencies that they've gained from selling virtually, but they've also, again, noticed those bad habits. You can't do the donut drop online, so to speak. So what we saw were that those bad habits, especially as the economy has started to reopen, those bad habits have reemerged. And so we see the philosophy of I can, therefore I do. So as the economy has reopened, sellers desperately want to get back out there and make those face-to-face calls. But just because sellers want to be back out there doesn't mean that buyers want to see them. And so, we have noticed that it's harder to get in to a buyer site. Certainly a lot more hoops to jump through in terms of temperature taking and PPE and that sort of thing. But the economy might be reopening, but the face-to-face sales call is not back completely. There's also that rush for revenue. So sellers are desperate because they have a weak pipeline, and so they're willing to commit to any deal, whether it's profitable or not. So certainly something for sales leaders to be thinking about. That brings us to the fear of competitors. And sellers are desperately worried that a competitor is going to get a jump on them, again, particularly if they have a lower price. And we also heard of, and I love this phrase, random acts of sales. So this came up in one of our surveys. We had somebody comment on that, and we were just very taken with the phrase, and it's quite apt, I think. That's a shotgun approach without really thought to process or purpose. So you're able to get back out there to some extent. We heard stories of salespeople driving 6 hours to make one sales call and then turn around and come back. And pre-pandemic, organizations would have never allowed that. You had to have a minimum of 3 or 4 calls lined up in order to make those types of trips. We also heard that they're not asking good questions. They're not getting deep enough. They're just trying, again, to rush the process and get to that closed sale. Gary.
Yeah, and it's our hypothesis that in this next brave new world we're entering, the virtual skills are going to be the skills that are going to be here to stay, because we think that even when the economy's back open and there's a vaccine and all those sorts of things, that companies will have realized there are efficiencies from a lot of this virtual work that we're doing now. So we believe at the end of the day, sellers are still going to need to be upskilled in how to effectively sell in a virtual world. So we believe that that's going to stay. The last thing that we really have to talk about, or we saw in the surveys, were quotas, compensation, and KPIs. How do I even try to incent my sales team? How do I set targets for them? What are reasonable targets and the like? What did we see there, Michelle?
Well, it's interesting. This is probably the second most popular topic that I get asked about, and have been asked about since the pandemic started, which is, what are other companies doing about quotas? What are they doing about compensation? And it's really a mixed bag. Less than 50% of organizations that we have surveyed and spoken to are making those quota readjustments. So there's a lot of talk about it, but very little action. And I think that's really due in part to the uncertainty. We just don't know or have a clear understanding of when things are going to rebound. What we need to keep in mind as sales organizations is whether or not you make that adjustment or not, it is going to have an impact on your sales motivation and your retention. And so what we're seeing is the organizations that are making some adjustments are making short-term adjustments. So comp adjustments on key activities in the sales process. So for instance, quality additions to the pipeline as opposed to closed sales, or they might be looking at larger wallet share or first orders from new accounts. So those are some ideas around quota and compensation adjustments. On the KPIs, we are seeing organizations adjust those. So you may have been really looking towards the end of the sale, looking at closed sales as in terms of KPIs. We're seeing more individualized KPIs that drive desired behavior. So we're seeing organizations focus on lead generation. How many new accounts can you get into the pipeline? Some organizations, particularly during the shutdown, if their salespeople could not sell, could not have customer contact, then organizations were setting KPIs to drive CRM compliance or training completion in the LMS, things that would keep momentum going and drive desired behavior. And one more thing, you can adjust expectations around things like number of sales calls. So Gary mentioned, the virtual selling. We expect that there will be a hybrid salesperson coming out of this, where they will make some face-to-face calls, but there will be an element of virtual. And so perhaps reevaluating expectations on the number of calls to incorporate virtual activities would be another recommendation.
Yeah. So that's really what, again, we surveyed literally thousands of sales leaders and have engaged in an awful lot of conversations. And at a high level, Dennis, that's kind of what we're seeing. Know that we're happy to share the results of this survey with any of the listeners and viewers, and happy to answer specific questions. But that's really where we've landed after day 154 of the pandemic.
Well, and I think the important lessons here, certainly there's a lot of interesting things, and we do have a question I'll get to in a minute, but the interesting piece is how you as an organization have adapted. And so there is a general question and then a very specific question. The general question is whether we're in the middle game of the pandemic or the end game, it's hard to quite say, but how much should there be continuing innovation around, from your viewpoint, the revenue enhancement sales process?
Well, I'll take the first cut at this and let Michelle, but, for us, and I think it really does depend in some ways on the business, but for us, it was absolutely critical. So we launched 7 key initiatives, realizing that 95+% of our business was dependent on being in person and the ability to travel and gather. We had to innovate, right? And so by getting close to the marketplace, to this surveying and regular conversations, we started to pick up on what sales leaders were looking for and what they needed help with, which led us to a series of innovation, right? We first came out with some very small products that then allowed clients to try it. They then asked for expanded products. So we actually listen to the marketplace and then use the marketplace for product development and realize that there was a shelf life to it. We could not, the products, if we still hadn't developed and put those out, they would have been expired by this point in time. So I think that rapid product development and listening to the marketplace are critical components in innovation and the ability to drive revenue. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything around that.
I would agree. I think what we're seeing, industry-wide is that organizations are, they're looking at their revenues drop and trying to figure out how can they pivot and be agile. Looking at new market segments, especially if you're in an industry where you've been hard hit, trying to find segments of the industry or segments of the market that have not been hard hit. And I read something recently that pest control companies, for instance, they have these foggers that they use to do pest control. And they actually took those and they converted them to foggers to go in and decontaminate spaces from COVID. So an example of how you can take what you do and pivot and find an opportunity that the market needs right now.
Yeah, and so then the other question, and then we need to move on to one of our other panelists, related to the beginning of your presentation around the three things that you have heard through the research are working, and cold calling was in there. And so there's a few people who say, I haven't cold called in years. Do you really think that's going to be something important going forward? And do I need to sharpen my skills in that area?
So our short answer is yes. Part of what's happened in this pandemic is, people have been let go, companies have downsized. And so what that tells us is that relationships are changing, right? So there may be opportunities where there weren't before. If a client had a long-standing relationship with a vendor, and either the vendor salesperson or the client purchasing person are gone, we think that opens an opportunity. We believe that if a company that has a set of tools that can truly benefit someone in this time of pandemic, then they're open to conversations. We heard time and time again that during especially the early stages, people were getting responses to emails that they might not have gotten before, or people were willing to jump on a phone that they maybe had not been able to get them before. And we think that part of that was people had time, and so they were willing to answer emails or get on the phone. But secondly, they were looking for answers. So if you have a product or service that provides real value to clients in this time, we've found that clients oftentimes will be more open to conversations. So that's what we're seeing partially around the cold calling idea. Michelle, any thoughts in addition to that?
And I'll be very brief. I would say that when you are making those cold calls and the phone outreach, plan your messaging and be very targeted to how you can help your customer in this current situation. So you want to, we call that high value messaging. So be very, very intentional and think about what you can do where is your customer right now, or your prospect, and how can what you have to offer help them right now. And that may mean that it's a different message than you may have used, say, 6 months ago or 9 months ago. But really think about that messaging and target it to what you can do for them in the moment, and that catches folks' attention.
Yeah, so again, I think it's fascinating, back to the beginning of your discussion, that one of the first things you did is tell your own salespeople, don't sell.
Yeah.
Go out and help.
We heard loud and clear from sales leaders that people that were selling them hard just came across as tone deaf. And that was a term we heard pretty consistently early on. And so that really resonated with us as well.
Yep. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Gary and Michelle. Now we're going to move to Todd, our processes and systems expert. And so Todd has a great background in this. And in fact, several of the ninjas that are interviewed in the book talked about Todd being one of their helpers in terms of fixing some things in their internal companies to make things run better and smoother. So again, if you think back to what a ninja is, they move smoothly in whatever direction they're moving, even when there's a crisis. And so Todd is, can we call you Mr. Smooth? Maybe not, but so let's start off, Todd. What are your clients doing in response to the whole pandemic?
Well, good morning, Dennis. Thanks for asking. Great question. I think back to a study from several years ago by two Harvard School business school professors that surveyed companies during a recession. And what they found was that the most successful companies do during a recession is play offense. Now, that does not mean that, next slide, please. That does not mean that that they initially start playing offense. They initially start playing defense because that's natural and necessary, with goals of preserving cash. So things like eliminating non-essential expenses, deferring large investments, or trimming headcount. Those are all things that you have to do to stabilize. But at some point, you have to do a ninja-like pivot to start playing offense. Now, that's uncomfortable, yet it is definitely necessary to prepare for the future. And why is that? Why does that help you succeed during a recession? Because your competitors are still playing defense. So you want to switch to playing offense ahead of your competitors. So how might you go about playing some offense? Well, you can go ahead and take proactive steps to permanently reduce your cost structure. So you can shop your essential needs like payroll processing. You can make small one-time investments in cost, and you can improve process efficiency. And that's what the quickest, easiest, and least play offense. So the question isn't, do I need to play offense? The question is, how do I play offense with less risk? And I believe the answer is through hitting singles and doubles.
Well, and so I think it's interesting in the ninja research, again, if you go back to the original concept of a ninja, they do a lot of skill building before they ever leave the ninja compound. So their skills are sharpened highly. They plan things out in advance, but they plan them in each step and what could go wrong in our backup. So again, I'm intrigued, singles and doubles, talk more about what that means.
Sure. To me, Dennis, singles and doubles are small projects that have quick payback. So in baseball, remember, you don't have to hit a home run to win. You can win ball games by consistently hitting singles and doubles. So I consider a single a project that takes 1 week or less, 40 hours. A double, 2 weeks or less, 80 hours or less. And quick payback that within 3 to 6 months, you will have recouped the time invested based on the time savings. So if you look at the Venn diagram, you'll see 3 rectangles: people, process, and technology. And that's how we look at business. So we view it, business results, coming from the alignment of those 3 boxes. The better the alignment, the better the business results, represented by ROI, return on investment, in the middle. Now, of those 3 elements, people, process, and technology, people and technology are the hardest and most expensive to change quickly. So process is the activities that stitch together your people and technology. Process also happens to be the easiest and least expensive component of people, process, and technology to change quickly. And I include, in terms of process, using technology to enhance your process.
Well, and I think it's interesting, again, in the ninja research, we found that a lot of the ninja entrepreneurs, they believe culture in a business is important, but they believe structure in a business is equally important, because if you have the wrong structure, you can have a good culture and things aren't going to be working right. So yeah, I hear what you're saying there. And so talk a little bit about the whole process improvement piece.
Well, in terms of singles and doubles, Dennis, let me just give you 2 sets of examples from my own business. One thing we did was early on was shop services that we need or deploy available technology. So in 3 areas: email security, we changed from Message Labs to Proofpoint Essentials. For payroll service, we changed from Benefit Mall to Payroll Solutions. Bonus, that's a local company in High Point. And finally, for email newsletters and email campaigns, we moved from Constant Contact to AC Mailing, which is a specific add-in available on through our website. In all cases, we achieved better functionality, improved ease of use, and best of all, in this environment, lower cost. So the second group of improvements were process improvements. And for those, we looked at three common administrative tasks within the firm: the routine or day-to-day accounting that has to get done, the monthly billing, and the monthly financial review. So for each of those three projects, the time invested was anywhere from 8 hours to 20 hours, or 1 day to 2.5 days. Each of them had a payback period of anywhere from 1.8 to 3.6 months. So those are three, small projects that had quick payback. So we can consider those, in the baseball terminology, 3 bunts. But if you look at all of them in total, they were still under 40 hours of time investment. So there you have your single.
Okay, so there's in our audience a number of business owners. What would you say to them at this point? Where would you start on some of this?
Well, I would suggest beginning to think of your business in terms of processes. I love this quote from Tom Northrup. He said that all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they are now getting. If we want different results, we must change the way we do things. So think of your business as a collection of processes that produce your business results, whether it's gross margin, net income, or whatever other measures you have along the way. When I'm talking about process, I'm talking about how something moves from start to finish. You've probably heard of the order to cash cycle, order to cash process. And an activity is an individual task is an individual step in that overall process. Continuing the order to cash process, an activity would be creating an order acknowledgement and sending it to your customer. Now, once you've begun to think in terms of processes and activities, the question becomes, how do you assess these? So imagine you're taking a trip from Asheville to Wilmington, passing by Winston-Salem and Greensboro along the way. Should be a straight shot down I-40, right? But let's say Google Maps routes you like shown in the upper doodle. What would you do? Well, you probably want to check your settings for Google Maps to make sure they were keeping you on the main roads and avoiding scenic detours. The same goes for processes. If you've got a broken processes, you need to look at the activities that are driving the route that your processes take. So the top doodle is a broken process. How can you tell if a process is broken? You want to listen for clues, such as people saying one of the following: someone always has to fix, fill in the blank, or this takes so many steps, or we do way too much manual work to get this through our process. So those are clues that you can then use to begin to ask questions, drill down, and get answers. And finally, you're going to drill down to the activity levels. Now, once you get to the activity levels, the question is relatively simple. Does that particular activity add value to the overall process or the overall business, or does it not? If it does, it's a value add activity, so you'll want to streamline that. If it doesn't, it's a non-value add activity, you'll want to eliminate it. So at this point, you should have done enough detective work and gotten enough answers in the field of how things get done that you can revamp your process by developing revised activities. At that point, you should have achieved your second doodle, that smooth process, which achieves the holy grail of better, faster, and cheaper. Completing our Google Maps analogy, this time Google Maps takes us from Asheville to Wilmington all the way via interstate.
Okay, great. And we're running a little short on time, so why don't you finish up, Todd, and we'll get to a question here.
Okay, very good. Finishing up some examples or ideas that you can apply to your business. I've listed 5 that are likely apply to most businesses. In any area of the company, you may hear, we've got everything in electronic format. The problem is that we don't have a way to manage all that. The idea is to check your business system for document management capabilities. Tip is, while you're at it, look for workflow management too. Workflow and document management go hand in hand. If you're a distributor or a manufacturer, you may hear, I can't pull together information to analyze and reduce our inventory levels. The idea, check your system's data export features. If they don't have what you're looking for, the tip is determine the database that the business system used. Maybe you can get it directly that way. In the area of sales, and I know Gary and Michelle run across this one all the time, our sales reps are not holding gross margin. So the idea is to set up an alert for order gross margin, whether it's based on the amount of gross margin or percentage gross margin for a particular sale. The tip is that many systems already provide this. However, if it does not, that's easy to set up. Similarly, in customer service, your reps may be saying, we're spending so much time pulling invoices and sending them to customers. The idea is to enable customer self-service via an easy-to-use web portal. Tip is that many business systems already provide this. If not, if your system is not one of those, don't despair. That's a fairly low cost and high impact enhancement. Finally, we spend too much time keying information into Excel. The idea is to use Excel's query capabilities to pull information in directly. With a tip, and this is an important one, check with your system folks first, because you don't want to be the one that slows down the system for everyone else. And I'll just leave you with a few takeaways. The transition from defense to offense, because that's what successful companies do. Hit singles and doubles, make those small one-time investments to reduce those recurring costs. Focus on the process efficiency. That's the easiest thing to change. And change your thinking. Imagine you're a new employee learning the job. So ask lots of questions about your processes and activities. So several ideas to help business owners succeed during the COVID recession. Hope they're helpful.
Thanks, Todd. And so this question, I'm really not sure you're going to be able to answer it, but maybe you can take a crack at it. So business owner says, I've got people squawking at me from every part of my company that I've got broken processes. And sales says theirs is the most important. Billing says theirs is most important. Other parts say theirs are most important, but we probably only have a budget to fix one or two. How do I triage that?
If it were me as a business owner, I go back to something that I heard one of my coaches say once, dance on the revenue line. What is going to bring you sales or cash flow the most quickly? As Gary and Michelle said, it's very hard to break through from a sales standpoint these days. I would look at the billing and collections processes and try and improve those first and see if you can get in, increase your cash flow that way. If that did not seem possible or practical, then I'd look at the sales first, second.
Okay, good.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Todd, for taking a crack at that one with limited information. So next we have Chad Oakley, and Chad is a business owner, award-winning business owner, I might add. So he understands the issues that we have going on, and he is also known nationally, and his firm is known nationally for being a talent acquirer, going out for companies, big and small, acquiring different talent, and also understanding what the talent itself is thinking about. So Chad, I think, given our audience, what maybe the two questions are: recruiting during the pandemic, what are some of the issues you're seeing? And then secondly, what is the best talent that you're recruiting expect from leadership once they come on board?
Dennis, thanks so much. And it's great to be here. So I appreciate you having us. And those are two questions that I can comment on pretty darn well. So let's start with the recruiting piece, right? So the top questions that we get from clients today, there's three of them. One is, Chad, I have a pretty important need in my company right now, but can I really recruit someone good during a pandemic, right? Or is everyone just in a heads down mode? Would I be tone deaf to the piece that Gary mentioned before? Is this a tone deaf time to do recruiting for critical roles? That's kind of number one. Number two is, all right, if I do pursue talent, can I get people on the cheap, right? We're in a recession, there's some people that have been impacted by unemployment. Can I recruit those individuals, at a discount, if you will? And what do I need to be thinking about on that front? And then third is, will people relocate during a pandemic? Because we tend to do a lot of national searches, right? Where the talent pool that we're pursuing are people from all over the country, if not all over the world. And so what are the constraints that we see from a relocation perspective? So let's take those one at a time, and I'll try to be quick because I know we're a little bit short on time. So that first question is, hey, I've got a critical need on my team. Can I actually recruit someone that's good during a pandemic? And so the answer is 50-50. That's why you see that 50-50 piece there. Here's what I mean by that. In the marketplace today, we're finding that approximately 50% of the labor force is at a company that is underperforming during COVID. And those individuals will respond positively to the opportunity to explore new opportunities. So they will accept your recruiting call pretty quickly. And if your opportunity is compelling, they'll be eager to pursue it further. However, the other 50% of the labor force are at companies that are doing just fine. And while they'll still talk to you, that's one nice silver lining about the marketplace today. We're finding that people will talk, right? They're at home. They're not traveling as much. They're easier to get a hold of. So they'll all talk, right? It's easier to get them on the phone. However, that other 50%, they feel pretty fortunate to be in a relatively good place. And we found that their bar has simply gone up. So we hear a lot of, hey guys, I'm happy to go down this path with you and talk more about a new opportunity, but this is going to have to be a really pretty great opportunity for me to make a change during this time period. I feel pretty fortunate at the place I'm at right now. So if you take both of these scenarios, right, on one side, candidates are more eager to talk. On the other side, maybe candidates are less eager to talk. Everything probably bounces out the same level of a recruiting success that we maybe saw pre-COVID. So the short answer to the question of can I actually recruit someone that's really good during a pandemic is yes, as long as you're looking in the right places, okay? So that's kind of one, the answer to the first question. And people are, and the tone deaf piece is, rarely do we talk to anyone who says, oh my gosh, isn't it weird to talk about recruiting during a pandemic? That's not been an issue that we've seen in the marketplace really at all. Second question is, can I get anyone cheap during the pandemic or during a recession? So you'll see that those gold bars there in the middle, that's actually fool's gold is our image. But so the answer here is that the short-term actions create long-term consequences, right? So Charles Aris, we've now been in business for over 50 years. We've experienced, like many of your organizations, a number of recessions. And what we've found is that certain more conservative candidates will be willing to accept a lower compensation package than they would during a growth cycle, right? So that fool's gold answer to the question is, yes, you can hire someone on the cheap during a pandemic or a recession. However, the challenge is that those same individuals will be very quick to leave you as soon as the market comes back and more compelling job opportunities come their way. So here's the way we like to think about it is, so if you're recruiting for a role whereby longevity is important in the position, then you're going to be really challenged to get someone on the cheap, right? You're going to want to hire that individual, pay them what the market rates are, and so that they will stick for you for the long time. But if you have a position where longevity is less important, maybe it's a more transactional role, negotiate pretty hard during the recession, knowing that you can land someone on the cheap, but they might leave you when the market actually rebounds. But you might be absolutely fine about that. I will say this: we found that companies that pay top performers well during a recession tend to win an outsized commitment of loyalty, if you will, from that person when the executive recruiters start calling, which I can assure you we will, right? So we will be calling. And so it's actually kind of refreshing when we hear a candidate say, hey, thanks for the call, but I'm at a great company. They've treated me really well, and I feel pretty loyal to them. I don't want to go anywhere. If you are paying, of course, at the right levels during a pandemic, it'll help with that. The one thing that I will mention is if you are trying to recruit top talent in the marketplace right now, we're seeing a lot of the best candidates require a severance program in their offers in order for them to change companies during the pandemic. They feel as though there's greater risk in making a change right now, and therefore they want some protection in case things go south. So be on the lookout for that. And then the last thing is, will people relocate during a pandemic? So the answer to this question is no. For the most part, people will not relocate during a pandemic. We found that candidates are happy to talk about relocating at some point once the pandemic has passed, right? So maybe that's 2021 when the height of the pandemic is behind us. But most candidates want no part of relocating at this time. So if it's a role where you must have a candidate in a specific location, you need to think about a couple of options. Number one, recognize that the candidate will expect to work remotely for the next 8 to 12 months. Or secondly, maybe only pursue local candidates, which can be hard if you're looking for talent that's pretty scarce and you're doing a national search. Worst case, and I know this might be hard for a position that's really critical to your organization, you might want to consider holding off on recruiting for that position until after the pandemic is behind us. I know that's not an acceptable option for a lot of people, but if you've got to have a position in a local spot, right? In other words, a location is critical, and you're looking for someone to relocate, it will be hard to convince people to do that at this moment in time, but it will get easier over time. Okay, so that's kind of everything we're seeing on the recruiting front, if you will. And then maybe the other thing that I'll mention is around what does the best talent in the marketplace expect to see on the leadership front? Okay, and I can sum it up pretty quickly, right? Compassionate and caring leadership matters more now than perhaps it ever has. Probably more than we've ever seen in the history of our country. This next generation of young leaders, right, the millennials, which is now the largest group in our workforce, right? They occupy 35% of the US workforce today, and that percentage is only growing as other generations move towards retirement. That generation, the millennial generation, they demand, we're seeing they will demand to work for a company that cares and cares about something more than just making money, okay? So you'll see on this slide that Rich has pulled up, right? What we refer to as the triple bottom line. Many of you might be familiar with this, but it's a concept that is growing in demand, especially with that next generation, right? And here's the thing is you've got to employ managers in key positions in your company that understand this concept, and they will do more than just talk about it, right? So millennials are smart, right? And they will sniff out a false narrative very quickly. So you need concrete plans that show that you care about things more than just the financials of your company, right? So that's what this framework talks about. It's the triple bottom line. In short, instead of just having one bottom line, the financial one, today's leading companies have two others: a social bottom line and then an environmental bottom line, right? Giving back both on the people side and then also on the planet side, right? So sometimes people refer to this as the 3 Ps: profit, people, and planet. I will give you an example of what we're doing right now on the social front, on that people piece. So as we all know, our country is experiencing 2 major transformations right now. One is the pandemic. The other is with regards to race. And the millennial generation is leading that transformation when it comes to race. So when George Floyd died in Minneapolis, the young leaders in our company, they wanted to talk about it. They wanted forums for dialogue. They wanted to know how our company was going to respond. They wanted to know how I personally was going to respond. I had multiple people reach out to me and say, Chad, what are we doing about this? And a lot of times I talk to maybe leaders of an older generation that they say, hey, look, I care about that, but I'm doing that stuff on my own. I'm doing that stuff at home, right? When I'm at work, I'm kind of doing work. That is no longer the mentality or the attitude of the youngest leaders in business today. Their attitude is, look, I'm going to spend a lot of my time at work, and I expect work to blend with my personal needs and my personal values, if you will. So let me tell you what we've done on this particular front. Charles Aris at our company, we hired a diversity and inclusion consultant that has now led inclusion awareness workshops for every single person in our firm, and not just one workshop, but 2. So every person in our company has participated in 2 3-hour work sessions to talk about race and inclusion. And we're now scheduling the 3rd for that. We've also created an inclusion recruiting task force, which is putting together diversity and inclusion key performance indicators that we will hold ourselves accountable for hitting. And these are KPIs for our internal recruiting efforts, right? What is Charles Aris doing on the recruiting front? But also, what are our expectations for our clients and their diversity and inclusion recruiting efforts? And then the last thing, from a leadership perspective, this past Monday and Tuesday, our COO and I attended the Race Equity Institute, which is 2 full days of training on the history of racism and what it looks like today. And on Monday, I'm giving a report to our company about what I learned. Look, I will not lie to you. Managing your company by the triple bottom line is not easy. It's more expensive than not doing it. You will spend money to do this, okay? But in today's day and age, we are strong believers that focusing on triple bottom line concepts is the #1 retention tool you can implement for your company, especially if you have a lot of millennials. Last year, or Dennis mentioned kind of some awards, but last year we were recognized as one of the best places to work in our community. And it's not because being an executive recruiter is just a happy-go-lucky job and we're all just singing kumbaya, right? Like many of your companies, this is a very hard job. It is intense. We are a pretty intense company. It's long hours and it's expected that you will work long hours. So this isn't an easy job, right? We win awards like that because of our focus on the triple bottom line. So my advice is when you're hiring for your key leaders, hire leaders that can help you implement triple bottom line concepts, and then watch your watch your company grow. So that's it. Sorry, I know we're right at the end of time, Dennis, but there you have it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chad. So one of the concepts of all our ninjas that I've interviewed is that when you show up at the important point of whatever it is you're doing as a company, your team needs to be with you. Now, they may not be physically with you, but many of the team members have helped you get ready for being there, making the sale, whatever it is that you're doing. And so if those team members are not working in coordination with one another, again, back to a key, the true ninja concept, and my friends in the Navy SEALs would say, if this team isn't working together, it is not additive. It is not multiplicative, actually. In the Navy SEALs, they look at how, people can be the equivalent of 2 or 3 if the team's working really well together. So thanks for those team building things. That sounds like a whole nother discussion, because I've been in a number of those strategy sessions about the millennials and what they're looking for. And it's a whole nother set of skills for those of you who are business owners. As Chad say, it's not easy. And we've got some additional ninja skills to learn, I think, in the future. So thank you all. Again, we've kind of handled questions as we have gone along. And thank you to Gary and Michelle with Brooks Group. Thank you, Todd Herman with Todd Herman and Associates. Thank you, Chad Oakley, for your contribution. And the man behind all of this, that it wouldn't be possible without. Thank you, Rich Williams, who helped make everything nice and smooth in the whole presentation. And again, good luck to everyone. And give us your feedback. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of, and we can put more of these together in the future. Thank you all.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.